welcome to the ASI Demo Day. Thank you so much for all coming. It's great to see so many people, and so many people that we've worked with before, and lots of new people as well. It's awesome. So, ASI, as a lot of you probably already know, was founded because inside of academia, everybody knows that there are way too many PhD students for the number of professorial jobs. But outside academia, everyone's desperate for really quantitative people. But there's this funny problem that often when people transition, they have to take a step down to get their foot in the door and then to go back up. And that's crazy. It doesn't make sense for the companies. It doesn't make sense for the people. But it's just the way that we see it happening. So ASI is kind of designed to help people across this transition, to stop this waste in human potential while people are trying to make this switch out of academia into the commercial world. So thank you so much for everything that every one of you is doing to help make this better for all of our fellows. But also in ASI, we're interested in some of the bigger questions. So in particular, here's an event that we're organizing next week, which is about the future of intelligence. So we're getting some of the world's leading AI experts, people like Stuart Russell from Berkeley, who literally wrote the textbook on modern machine learning, on modern artificial intelligence. And we're bringing them together with politicians and CEOs and sort of decision makers to really start having this conversation about what the next 50 years are going to look like in this new environment where machines can start to do problems that used to be solely the sort of purview of humans. And one of the guys that's coming to this is a guy called David Harding. So David's a really interesting character. He set up a hedge fund, which got bought. He decided that got too bureaucratic, so he set up Winton Capital Management. And he basically did this to kind of prove that you could build a business in finance around empirically driven scientific kind of methods rather than marketing and trying to sell people on nebulous lies. And so, but now Winton Capital was extremely successful, and now David is very wealthy. And since the ASI is starting to think about looking for funding, we don't pass up the opportunity to meet billionaires lightly. So I started thinking about the kind of connections between data science and what David's done with Winton Capital Management. And actually, there's a great deal of similarity. There's lots of the tools that are used in both. And I started wondering, well, it's kind of weird, right? Because if you think back to 50 years ago or even 60 years ago, finance really wasn't the sophisticated industry that it is today. It was much more like this, with guys in ridiculous blazers shouting at each other. And I started to wonder why this transition from this kind of very intuitive, human-driven enterprise to the modern finance, which is very data-driven, extremely mathematical, and already hires the kind of people that other companies are starting to think about hiring. And I think the reason is basically that the financial markets were the first sort of region of industry to start generating vast quantities of data. So for the first time, in this kind of period, back in the sort of 50s and 60s, there just simply wasn't enough data to do the analysis. That then in the 80s, 90s, and onwards, it became possible. So we thought about this for a little while, and we thought it would be kind of cool if we could sort of use that to figure out when the data transition happens in a particular industry. So we took the number of trades that the New York Stock Exchange made in a year, because you probably want to constrain yourself to some period, and asked how many data points, and all of this is very approximate, but how many data points were people seeing in 1975 compared to 1985? And in 75, it was maybe a few hundred million, maybe even getting up to a billion. But by 1985, it was much more like 10 billion. Okay, so that's interesting. Maybe that points to something, maybe it doesn't. So So then we asked ourselves, well, what's another transition to where an industry became data-driven? And since we work with Tesco's, and you're going to hear about, in fact, one of the first talks is going to be about Tesco's and how they use data. And we looked at this club card example. And if you think about how, when the club card came about, so it was about 1995, Tesco's had about 30%-ish of the UK market, that's 65 million people. If you look at the number of weekly items that those people were buying and figure out how many data points that gives you, amazingly enough, that comes out to about 10 billion as well. So is this just a coincidence, or is there something a bit more fundamental going on here? Well, if you ask yourself what's sort of the maximum amount of information that a human could possibly process in their kind of career. So let's say we give you 2 words a second. You can understand 2 words a second, and you talk to people for 12 hours a day, 365 days a year, for 30 years. That turns out to be about a billion words. So in a sense, a billion data points. So it's interesting, right? We have 2 regimes. We have this old school regime where you have less than 10 billion data points a year. And that tends to be the regime where humans, with their intuition, with their sort of understanding of the bigger picture, can contribute. And then when an industry switches from that domain into a domain where it's generating much more data, you go into this 10 billion points a year and you get to sort of modern quant analysts and hiring the kind of deeply mathematical people that people like Winton have been. So what does this really imply for data science? So instead of just, we all kind of have this intuitive understanding that making decisions based on data is actually quite a smart thing to do. It seems obvious, but now we can start to think about when particular industries are going to transition. So, as things move onto the internet, as sort of medicine becomes we start to get digitized records, we have more of a sense of when that transition will happen. When they get to about 10 billion points a year, humans will not be able to compete with algorithms anymore. And so for us, this is a really exciting opportunity. Perhaps the most exciting thing about it is we're really at the start of the wave. So we get to play a part in influencing the direction of this field and how it develops into the future. So with that, I'd like to stop and introduce you to 13 of the people that are going to play a huge part in London and beyond in taking this field forward into the next sort of 20, 30 years. Thank you.